Did you know that foreign investors are quietly funding lawsuits in American courts through a practice called third-party litigation funding? Shadowy overseas funders are paying to sue American companies in our courts, and they don't pay a dime in U.S. taxes if there is an award or settlement. They profit tax-free from our legal system, while U.S. companies are tied up in court, and American families pay the price, to the tune of $5,000 a year. But there is a solution. A new proposal before Congress would close this loophole and ensure these foreign investors pay taxes, just like the actual plaintiffs have to. It's a common-sense move that discourages frivolous and abusive lawsuits and redirects resources back into American jobs, innovation, and growth. Only President Trump and congressional Republicans can deliver this win for America and hold these foreign investors accountable. Contact your lawmakers today and demand they take a stand to end foreign-funded litigation abuse.
Craftsman Days are here at Lowe's with big savings on the tools you need. Right now, get a free select tool when you buy the Craftsman V20 2-pack battery kit. Whether it's the backyard, the bathroom, or beyond, Craftsman has the tools to help you power through and get the project done right. Because DIYing is unpredictable, but your tools shouldn't be. Shop Craftsman at Lowe's today. Valid through 6/18 while supplies last. Selection varies by location.
And welcome again to the Explaining History podcast. And I'm talking about something just a bit different today because it's really, really important. You know, the thing I want to talk to you about really kind of shapes or should shape everything we think about the Western world and everything we think about modern history. But it's the product of, and you may be aware of his work, the economist Thomas Piketty, who wrote Capital in the 21st Century. He's recently conducted a groundbreaking study, one that's kind of genuinely jaw-dropping in its scope. And the kind of journalist and entrepreneur and Sinophile Arnaud Bertrand, of whom I've spoken before, on his Substack, had this to say about it. The study itself is essentially a study of the flows of global trade from 1800 to 2025, throughout the period of European imperialism in the global south. Arnaud Bertrand writes, I'm not normally a fan of Thomas Piketty. What kind of person calls their book Capital, but simultaneously badmouths Karl Marx? You know, Piketty is not a Marxist by any stretch of the imagination, but you would think if your book is called Capital, you might give a nod to Marx. Who knows? And it says he never managed to read all of the original Das Kapital. It's probably, again, something you would expect him probably to have read. But credit where credit's due. He just published a groundbreaking new study that's genuinely fascinating. It is, in fact, somewhat ironically, the data-driven and unequivocal proof that Marx was correct when he said that capitalist wealth accumulation in Western imperialist countries was fundamentally based on exploitation and unequal power relations rather than fair market exchange. Let's look through the paper. First of all, a key value of the work is that Piketty and Gaston Neves, a PhD student, based their study on a new database that they put together, which is accessible. I'll put a link below, that systematically reconstructs global trade flows and balance of payments for the entire world for more than 2 centuries, from 1800 to 2025. So what does that mean? They've essentially simulated the way in which trade flowed between countries, or flowed from colonies to colonizers, and balances of payments, where the net flows of money came from. A balance of payments is very quickly the difference between what you spend on imports and what you make on exports. And if you have a balance of payments deficit, it means you're buying more things from abroad than you're selling, and that means there is a net outflow of wealth from your country. A classic example of this was Great Britain and much of the rest of Europe before the Chinese Opium Wars. China was a net exporter of tea and silk and china and other things to Europe, and didn't require any European manufactured goods. And so as a result, there's a net outflow of wealth. Most of it looted, silver and gold looted from Latin America. A net outflow of wealth from Europe to China. And the British dealt with this by filling China with opium, a nasty trick. This, writes Arnaud Bertrand, is genuinely groundbreaking work. No one, to my knowledge, has ever before created such a comprehensive database that tracks not only the visible flows of goods and of goods trade, but crucially the invisible flows of services, foreign income, and foreign transfers across the entire world, covering 48 major countries individually, plus 9 residual regions that together achieve a complete global coverage of population and GDP over more than 2 centuries. What makes this database particularly valuable is that it allows us for the first time to see the complete picture of how wealth actually flowed between regions since 1800. And not what just was officially traded, but the colonial transfers, tribute payments, home charges from India to Britain, debt impositions on Haiti and China, and all the other mechanisms through which the West extracted wealth from the global South. What the data shows is what everyone in the global South knew instinctively, but was contradicted by the dominant economic narrative. The West's wealth was built not through superior productivity or free trade, but through systematic extraction, forced transfers, and colonial plunder on a scale that dwarfs anything previously quantified. Take this extraordinary metric for instance. Now, this is the bit that I thought the listeners of the Explaining History podcast need to hear this. Particularly if you are listening to this from a European country, or you are listening to this from a country that has been colonized by white Europeans, such as America or Australia. The author's simulations show that a mere 20% increase in primary commodity prices over the years 1800 to 1914, which the study says corresponds to an absolute lower bound estimate of the value of unpaid forced labour in the export production of cotton, sugar, grain, etc. over this period, would have left Europe with foreign debts equivalent to 160% of its GDP, completely reversing global wealth patterns. What does that mean? That means that if Europeans had paid a fair price for anything that they imported throughout the entirety of the 19th century, they would have wound up with debts equivalent to 160% of Europe's GDP. Arnaud Bertrand writes, put another way, had Western imperialist powers actually paid for what they took instead of extracting it through colonial violence and unpaid forced labour, the developed world would have been the developing world and vice versa. What's also extraordinary is that this system of extraction very much continues to this day. So, wow. This kind of upends. I mean, it's nothing that's the Western left has not, on some level, instinctively known, and it's nothing that has not instinctively been known throughout the global South. But to have it there in sort of like a statistical version that proves incontrovertibly that when you walk through central London or Paris or Brussels or Berlin or Rome, the impressive architecture, the modernity, the orderliness, the world that you see is the product of the extraction of colonial wealth. And there is this argument to say that when in Britain there has been this huge debate over reparations for slavery, and the right say, well, okay, slavery was bad, but the people that benefited from that, they're dead and gone. The people that owned large country houses in Derbyshire and grew fat from the profits of the slave trade and their cotton mills, they're gone. The rest of society, ordinary British people who live in quite modest lives, why are they to blame? Well, it's an interesting question. And the reality is that all of British society, from the very, very wealthiest who hogged the vast majority of the wealth accrued from slavery, all the way down to the poorest, all of them materially benefited in some way from either cheaper commodity prices or from public amenities being funded through the proceeds of slavery, either through philanthropy, such as Colston Hall in places like Bristol, or from taxation. This is what makes countries. This is what has made Britain wealthy. And if Britain had been forced to pay a fair price, then the commodity producing countries of the global South would have become much, much wealthier. Britain, at the beginnings of the British Empire, is a fairly unprosperous country. It's been racked by war, the kind of the late 16th, early 17th century, all the way up to the mid 17th century, is a time of intense conflict. It is not a very wealthy island, comparatively speaking, when compared to Northwest Europe, when compared to India or to China, in terms of GDP per capita and a whole range of other indices. Those places are streaks ahead. It's not a very well island. It's in terms of public health. And if you want a better kind of look at this, read Indian Summer by Alex von Tunzelmann. And in the introduction, it compares India and Britain in the 17th century. And it's a very, very interesting comparison. In terms of wealth, Britain by necessity, Britain found India wealthy and left it poor. India was a very, very attractive country for Britain to colonize because of the wealth that the East India Company found there, and the wealth that could be extracted not just through an equal trade, but also through the East India Company burrowing its way into areas such as tax collection. So we mentioned China previously, and how the balance of payments was corrected through the use of opium in China, and how when China objected to this, when there were the Qing Emperor at the time had a crackdown on opium production, it wasn't just an affront to the British, it was an existential threat. We've now reached, after a kind of a century of what you might think of as European civil war, and the European Union is the kind of the recovery project following that. We are now reaching a point where some might view it as a Chinese century, but I wonder if we are going to witness the century of China and the global South. The more one reads on the kind of the BRICS countries that have commodities and populations, which are going to be the game changers, along with technology and data, there is far less kind of
Did you know that foreign investors are quietly funding lawsuits in American courts through a practice called third-party litigation funding? Shadowy overseas funders are paying to sue American companies in our courts, and they don't pay a dime in U.S. taxes if there is an award or settlement. They profit tax-free from our legal system, while U.S. companies are tied up in court and American families pay the price, to the tune of $5,000 a year. But there is a solution. A new proposal before Congress would close this loophole and ensure these foreign investors pay taxes, just like the actual plaintiffs have to. It's a common-sense move that discourages frivolous and abusive lawsuits and redirects resources back into American jobs, innovation, and growth. Only President Trump and congressional Republicans can deliver this win for America and hold these foreign investors accountable. Contact your lawmakers today and demand they take a stand to end foreign-funded litigation abuse.
The Jeep brand has always stood for American freedom. And now we're standing with you with Employee Pricing Plus. Hurry into your Jeep brand dealer for details today and join the family. Jeep, there's only one. Offer valid on select 2024 and 2025 Jeep brand vehicles for non-FCA employees and retirees. $200 admin fee applies. Not all buyers will qualify. Restrictions apply. Does not apply to leases. Ends 6/30/25. Jeep is a registered trademark of FCA US LLC.
obeisance, shall we say, to Western demands. The great kind of fraud that Western countries perpetrated, and I referred to it briefly when looking at neoliberals recently, on the global South, was the use of debt in the post-war era, and the use of debt in order to, again, extract commodities and to privatize the states of global South countries, and to return them to the level of low-skill, cheap commodity producing nations. Now, when I've talked about the neoliberals, I talked about Wilhelm Röpke yesterday as one of the key neoliberals who saw, and Hayek and Friedman saw this as well. They saw the possibility of decolonialization or anti-colonialism or anti-colonial movements as a real danger to this idea of this kind of almost kind of mechanism of global trade that they envisaged. What they were really modeling, what they were really talking about, what they were really thinking about was empire. These were guys who had transcended from, they'd grown up in the late years of the 19th century and into the 20th century, and they didn't think of themselves as imperialists, but they were. And they were constantly, if not deliberately, that then kind of unconsciously, though I don't doubt with these guys that there was a lot of deliberacy to them, looking to return global South countries to the position of supplier nations, places that grew coffee, places where you could mine bauxite, places where you could harvest timber. And they didn't see for them any role in terms of development. That would be counterproductive. That's not what you want, because then they will start to disrupt this system where certain countries are consumer countries, certain countries are producer countries, and certain countries that consume also produce high technology, high value goods that the producer countries can have to some extent. You have to sell a lot of coffee beans in order to buy a computer. And the idea that they might produce their own computers, it was, a kind of an anathema. There is some indication that now, where we are at in the kind of early decades of the 21st century, that industrialization in sub-Saharan Africa and places like that may well now be possible. And what Europe looks like at the end of the 21st century, what the first world looks like, what America and Canada and Australia look like at the end of the 21st century, I think will be decided in Kenya, Ghana, Nigeria, Botswana. It will be decided by the fracturing of these imperial colonial ties, which are fracturing, they are on the wane. Partly because of the kind of relative economic decline of countries like Great Britain, not absolute, but relative. And partly because of the fact that that communication technologies and political ties between South to South political ties are strengthening. If you look at solidarity movements for Gaza in places like South Africa, that's, I think, the thing that really should give Israel pause for thought. It's that there is a widespread global South movement of solidarity. And once those, the imperial relations that have shaped all of our lives up until this moment, once those begin to really fundamentally fracture, and you might see this if there's a widespread adoption or de-dollarization across Africa and Asia, which hasn't happened yet, but it might well do, then you're going to see something fundamental happen in the world that hasn't happened in 500 years at least, maybe longer. Then we're going to see a multipolar century, the likes of which probably right now it would be difficult to imagine. The purpose of this podcast isn't to imagine what a multipolar century is going to look like, or what a century where the comparative political and economic power of a global South country like Bolivia or the Philippines or Ghana isn't that far off from a European country. What I'm not so concerned about being kind of like a Nostradamus figure and trying to predict that. I think it's on the way. The purpose of this podcast is to explain the imperial realities behind what the past at least 200, if not 500 years have really all been about. why there are poor global south countries compared to inexplicably rich islands like Great Britain. And it's about colonialism.
Hey, this is Naomi Ekperigin, co-host of the podcast Couples Therapy. I wanted to talk to you about Boost Mobile, the newest 5G network in the country. Boost Mobile's new network delivers customers the speed and service they'd expect from the big three, plus groundbreaking benefits you'd only get from a true challenger in the industry, like letting people try the network risk-free for 30 days, and offering a $25 per month unlimited plan that's guaranteed to never go up in price. So visit your nearest Boost Mobile store or find them online at boostmobile.com.
Did you know that foreign investors are quietly funding lawsuits in American courts through a practice called third-party litigation funding? Shadowy overseas funders are paying to sue American companies in our courts, and they don't pay a dime in U.S. taxes if there is an award or settlement. They profit tax-free from our legal system, while U.S. companies are tied up in court and American families pay the price, to the tune of $5,000 a year. But there is a solution. A new proposal before Congress would close this loophole and ensure these foreign investors pay taxes, just like the actual plaintiffs have to. It's a common sense move that discourages frivolous and abusive lawsuits and redirects resources back into American jobs, innovation, and growth. Only President Trump and congressional Republicans can deliver this win for America and hold these foreign investors accountable. Contact your lawmakers today and demand they take a stand to end foreign-funded litigation abuse.
Pure and simple. It's about the transfer of wealth from the global south to the global north through the capture of free labor, for the most part, and free resources. And that's why the first world, America, Britain, and its allies have fought relentless colonial wars in parts of the world that their inhabitants have never heard of, from Iraq to Egypt to Haiti to Vietnam to Algeria, to hang on to the wealth those places create, to hang on to the unearned income of the wealthy world. And I would say, if not now, then very soon, the jig will finally be up. I think so. So, I'll leave you on that thought, and I hope you find this an interesting episode. I'll put a link towards Piketty's work down below. Have a look for yourself, and I'll catch you on the next Explaining History podcast. Take good care now. All the best. Bye-bye.
Did you know that foreign investors are quietly funding lawsuits in American courts through a practice called third-party litigation funding? Shadowy overseas funders are paying to sue American companies in our courts, and they don't pay a dime in U.S. taxes if there is an award or settlement. They profit tax-free from our legal system, while U.S. companies are tied up in court and American families pay the price, to the tune of $5,000 a year. But there is a solution. A new proposal before Congress would close this loophole and ensure these foreign investors pay taxes, just like the actual plaintiffs have to. It's a common sense move that discourages frivolous and abusive lawsuits and redirects resources back into American jobs, innovation, and growth. Only President Trump and congressional Republicans can deliver this win for America and hold these foreign investors accountable. Contact your lawmakers today and demand they take a stand to end foreign-funded litigation abuse.
When we started writing our thoughts down on paper, it opened up endless possibilities. Ideas could grow beyond the borders of the mind, and it changed the world. Somewhere along the way, we lost touch with paper, distracted by devices made for every purpose except for thinking and focus. On edge, waiting for the next notification. But what if new technology didn't pull us away from paper, but brought us closer to it? Listen. That's not paper. It's the sound of the new Remarkable Paper Pro, rewriting the future. A paper tablet with a true color ink display, gentle reading light, and unheard of tactility. With digital features for taking notes, thinking, and organizing, without any distractions. Paper is about to change the world again. Get your paper tablet at remarkable.com today.